Hello and welcome to our Atlassian Livestream with Agile and DevOps industry experts. I'm Susie Prince, Head of Product for DevOps at Atlassian, and I'm excited to be here today with Patrick Debois, who's joining us from one of our partners, Sneak. Patrick, you're someone who's been integral to DevOps, and so we're very excited to have you here. Can you give us an introduction and a little bit of your history?
Sure. I have been for many years working in the IT industry. You can see I have gray hair, and I've done pretty much all the roles I could think of, from working on the UI, working on the back end, working on the systems, being a manager, being a coder, being a tester, and I guess that's what in 2009 kind of led me in this discussion about DevOps. It's like every time I entered the new group, I felt like, hey, they think I can't do the previous thing that I worked at. And so I kind of started working with Agile teams. And since then, I thought about how the collaboration between Dev and Ops could work together. And then what most people kind of refer to me is that I kind of started by accident, I always say, the first conference around DevOps called DevOps Days. And since then, I've been kind of looking for ideas, nurturing people who have ideas and kind of feeding them all to the world. And I guess that's me. And we're now about 11 years or 12 years later, and I'm still doing this. So.
That's great. Yeah, I've definitely seen some of that journey myself. When you look back, you said 2009, here we are, the last 2 years I think have been quite different. What are the changes that you have seen over that period of time?
You mean from 2009 or the last 2 years?
Oh, I think 2009, and then I'm anticipating maybe you've seen an acceleration even more in the last 2 years.
Sure.
But you tell me. Yeah.
Well, the first thing in 2009 was there were a lot of people who were having similar pains with the cloud and moving to the cloud, and Agile was ramping up. So all these kind of friction points were leading up to, hey, it's not working anymore, what we did in the past. There was a lot of discussion and freedom of sharing. What I also noticed that there was a lot of people who are already been around the block for a few times, that they kind of like, okay, it's not working. We need to have another way of working. But since then, the idea of looking at it more holistically, looking at the bottleneck, that has grown over the past couple of years. And I've seen so many terms like, we usually say well, DevOps, but I've seen front-end ops, I've seen the database ops, I've seen network ops, I've seen WinOps, and that's kind of every new label has brought a new thing to the discussion. For example, design ops brought some design thinking in there, and that was a nice thing. It just keeps growing from multiple sources as ideas over the years. So that's been growing, and I think the excuse of you can't do DevOps were in our company, those kind of discussions have stopped over the 10 years. So there is no excuse that people say you can't do it. And that's kind of a big thing that changed over the years, where in the beginning, you're kind of always convincing people there's another way. And in a way, we're still doing that today. But the assumption in the large audience has definitely changed that. Well, we're doing it. It's accepted. It's like a known practice, and we're all trying to achieve this in our company.
That's great. And it seems like we have some questions about what other ops have you seen. I know that I have seen of the biz, DevSecOps, all squashed together. And it sounds like to you see that as a good thing. That is just the culture sort of spreading out and coming together in more and more parts of the organization, acknowledging this way of working. But is that how you see it?
Well, there's an obsession with a term that I
Yes,
noticed, right?
yes,
Is it DevOps, and every new thing, is it DevOps or is it not DevOps, or should it have a new
right.
label or not a new label? Uh, we've had discussions how we should spell DevOps. Is it with an uppercase? Is it with a lowercase? I heard like all these discussions, and
Yes,
I think in the end we shouldn't be fretting about the labels, because I usually
yeah,
say, well, why don't we just call everything agile, right? And in a way, it is like we're not doing
yes,
anything different
yes,
from those things. But that's how I see the power. Like whatever label we come up with, or whatever term that is the flavor du jour, it, it's not always about the buzzwords. It
hmm,
usually highlights an existing pain. And the way that I started thinking about it is that, well, every time a new buzzword, we're going to have like another attention point. And it's a little bit like bottlenecks in companies can move, and we shouldn't always keep working on that one bottleneck we
right,
identified kind of like 10 years ago, that is the thing we're going to use to solve everything. And that's also a little bit of a fallacy when people say, well, we had DevOps, we've seen DevOps, and then now we're SRE, and then SRE has faded, and then we're doing GitOps. I'm just putting random words here, not that they're
sure,
related, but
yes,
but it's kind of this mentality of the old label is bad, and the new is where we should be to be the cool kids on the block. I just think that every keyword has its merit in that it brings
hmm,
something to the attention and it brings stories out. And that's how I want to look with it. One day I would hope that we're not talking about DevOps anymore. And I see it already happening. People don't want to use the word anymore because it's getting old. And
hmm,
but luckily I don't have any stock options invested in the word DevOps.
in the word
Yeah,
DevOps.
so it doesn't matter that much. And I see it a little bit in comparison to memes. Like we all know memes on the internet.
Yeah,
And it's, if you look up the word meme, it says it's the cultural identity
right,
that we use, a piece of cultural identity. And that's the same thing. DevOps will coexist, whatever we're going to name it in the next wave of IDs. So it doesn't matter that much. You can even do DevOps without mentioning the word. And if the word becomes a blocker, like there's opposition to the word, or
yes,
just look at the problem space, and that's
yes.
fair enough.
Yeah, I think that really resonates with me. We, in our organization at Atlassian, we have an agile part of the organization and a DevOps part of the organization, and we're sometimes like, where is this line? Like, what is the difference? And sometimes we just say, oh, it's modern software development, because the words have meaning that they don't really have meaning. We're just talking about how we currently believe is the best way to deliver the best software.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of removes the complexity of those terms. I'm curious, you mentioned there, when you think about organizations and people are, or they were, like, there was excuses not to do quote unquote DevOps. Do you think it's just time that has allowed for people to sort of acknowledge that they, this is for everybody, we're in a federated, we're in a federal industry or a regulated industry, we can do this. Like, I'm curious whether it's just, peer pressure, like why do you think that reaction to it's not for us has kind of changed over time?
Yeah, there are different profiles of sometimes being risk averse, and I say that in the code context, like you shouldn't be adopting the latest thing just because everybody's kind of adopting it. So you kind of have to look what value it's bringing to you. And in that way, you always have like the early adopters who want to go with the new
Yeah.
thing, and they might be in the situation when either they feel more business pressure and they need to do something,
Yes.
or it's just that they have more space of taking changes. And so one is not per se better than the other, and it's totally normal that there's larger companies, when you start a change, the people impacted in a change. So the irony is that they might benefit the most, but imagine it would fail. We're doing something that isn't good.
Yes.
The impact would be enormous. So that's kind of where you have a natural selection of why people are adopting it early or not. And it also depends on your industry, like you're saying. Is it more risk averse? Is it less risk averse? And also the people. Like if you're hiring and your whole company culture is about like, we should keep everything stable, then, well, guess what? You're going to stay stable for a while. And there's nothing wrong with it. But again, looking at your problems, like if you have a problem, look at that problem. And there's this example somebody told me about. They go into a large organization and they say, well, shouldn't you be doing DevOps? I remember that. And they said, like, the CEO said, like, but what if I just increase my price with 0.5 euros? That has the same effect, right? Like, why would we risk changing our whole organization for a benefit that I can get in another way, in a less riskier way? And I think it puts things in perspective, right? You shouldn't just be doing this if there's no clear benefit, or it isn't aligned with what your biggest need is at that time.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like one of the things that I've noticed, because I'm on the product management side, is there's a heavy emphasis to like, these are about engineering practices, and this is about like changing your engineering culture. And I always try really hard to bring it back to like, but it's for a reason. It's for, is there a business need for this? Is there a challenge, a risk, a disruption that you're trying to overcome? For the sake of it, I think is not what really matters. Yeah.
And Philippe, I agree with you. The terms get overused, and I think that's. I've been thinking very hard how one can protect a term that it has the original meaning, but it's. Agile had a manifesto of, what was it, 12 lines. ITIL had 12 books. I just didn't feel like the effort of putting the inevitable that it's gonna be misused. So yeah.
And so we have a question here. Putting a label DevOps on your project might be important to drive the change management. Do you think that's the case? Do you think sometimes that having this label, I think Agile, I think my experience has seen, like, if you say that it has meaning, little a, big A, you take your choice on that. But do you think DevOps does help, that it sort of, inspires change?
Yeah, I think definitely. So if you have a problem and the problem is clear, and the pain of the DevOps, the collaboration between the silos is predominantly, it's blocking you from delivering stuff, that's definitely something that can drive a change. And any new term, I often say, like, is there anything specifically in the DevOps transformation or the DevSecOps transformation? It's every time the same. It's a new change in a company. You need kind of allies who believe in the change, whatever the rally cry is, a therm or a pain or anything there, is that you can get behind that. And in some companies, if you would put the term agile now as a rally cry, it will not stick anymore, because they've heard so many different stories of things that work and not work. So there is a timely aspect of using a term with what it's associated with, that it helps, yes or no. So
yeah, and so one of the things we wanted to talk about with you today was this. We talked about DevOps and this variety of different kind of mashups. The rise of DevSecOps. What is your perspective on that? Is that something that you feel has additional meaning beyond DevOps? Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so much like I explained in the beginning, DevOps was the friction, the cloud, agile, they were all like pushing things. I think with DevOps, people went to the cloud, they got better automation, they get like something sorted out, but there were just the new bottleneck was for them was security and dealing with security, and it was for a number of reasons. Yes, due to we're going to the cloud, we need to rethink our security perimeter. It's not anymore inside our walls or outside our walls. It's like in the cloud. So location is a different concept for security. The deploys going on all the time and getting reviews was putting the pressure on the security people that we kind of need another way to deal with this. And then the whole mentality that the impact of a security issue due to the SaaS scale of people being impacted when something of a security level impacts, which can impact the almost like the PR of the company, right? You need to respond, you need to have an ID, you need to have this under control, or your options are just going kind of down. That kind of risk is all building up to also you see it in the news, like security is now like cyber attacks. We're getting aware that the impact is kind of getting ahead of us. So it's not just the one thread of DevOps. There is like a cultural concept. We're driving it as a society. Security, privacy is a concern. And it's all kind of building up to security being the next bottleneck, how we deal with it, this stuff. And I like we found a new label. I know people hate it because they say, how is it different from DevOps? But then again, if I would search DevOps now as somewhere on Google or on Twitter, I will only get all the different stories. If I find DevSecOps, I get the focus stories around security. And yes, some will abuse the term and kind of put all the marketing material in there, but at least there is a way of labeling the stuff that we're all trying to improve as a practices.
Yeah, going back to our earlier conversation when I was asking you about like what have you've seen the change, I think this is obviously a change we've seen, like this thoughtfulness about security and the implications of that when you work in this way. Do you think this is also helpful to those industries that were more risk adverse, that they can now see that there's an acknowledgement that it's not, there's not a misunderstanding that this is just about getting faster and putting anything out to our customers. Like this is about putting the right thing out and high quality. Do you think that has really helped sort of elevate and acknowledge that, yes, it's that, safely, we're going to do it safely as well as continuously?
Well, there's definitely some riding along with DevOps to kind of say, well, it worked for DevOps, why shouldn't it work for security, right? So there's definitely a little bridge that people are making on it. But yeah, the people who are more risk averse, they're embracing a little bit more, less of the mentality, we can never fail. And it was the same thing when DevOps started, where our architectures were about, we cannot fail, right? And the same was in security, like we need to protect and we can't let nobody in. Of course, we had the multiple layers of defense, but we're starting to see that we cannot do this alone. And it's like operations, we could not do this alone. We started to have the problems and seek help from other people in the company, because the security folks could not do this alone. Like ops doing this alone without understanding the application, they couldn't do this alone. And that's kind of a new shift in mentality. I'm totally not advocating that they should release unsecure code, but there is a transfer of knowledge that you can do from your security department to other people. It's not 100%, and it might be just the 20%, but at least there is help you're getting from other people inside of your company to do this better.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think some of the things, I don't know if we've seen it in our comments today, please, if anybody's out there, send us some questions through, but I'm curious if somebody is just, new to this term and is thinking about how do they, they're seeing potentially some of the bottlenecks that you referred to earlier and some of those challenges. Like, how do you recommend they start to think about, having a DevSecOps culture even before they start to think about like other things.
Yeah. So the first rule in any pain is kind of stop the bleeding.
Right.
And usually that is about like getting awareness or getting at least some way to react when things go wrong.
Yeah.
And I know the industry has a big narrative around doing things early in the value stream and fixing, but
Yes.
you kind of usually stop by stopping the bleeding somewhere in production in a way. And then you get a little bit more time to kind of go earlier in the value stream and get more at the cause or way you can fix the problems. But those are important to keep in mind, is that you will hear a lot of DevSecOps narrative, which is good. You know, we're scanning the code, we're scanning our environments for vulnerabilities, and we're testing them again in our pipeline. We're educating developers to write better quality code, and security is becoming part of that. But at the same time, by creating this observability, making sure things work in production, that you have things under control, kind of both are important. And I don't know how I can stress this enough. It's like, as much as shifting left, what people say is shift left early in the value stream, get also the shift right, which was kind of DevOps under control with your monitoring and so on. And then the third layer is like, once you kind of are able to stop the bleeding, you're able to start early in the value stream on the development. There's the third, what sometimes in the book is of the DevOps handbook is referred to the third way, which you're actually learning, right? Because if you don't learn about, like, you're doing something, you hit a problem, and you're hitting the same problem over and over again, and that's why it's a little bit of the mentality. It doesn't really, if you can't choose very well what your first thing is, just pick one. Just don't worry about it. If it's clear, just do the first that is you need to do first. But if not, just after that, it's like, did it change something? Let's keep it that way, let's keep it controlled, and then kind of start tackling the problem. When I talk to CISOs, they say, like, we stopped saying what people needed to do in a way. We ask them, what do you think is the most important, and start doing that. Of course, they will give guidance and they'll give their advice, but it's kind of getting started, getting bootstrapped is kind of the first step. And if you do this voluntarily, it will get way more buy-in from whatever team that is kind of tackling the problem.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Like, stop the bleeding. And I suspect in most cases, like, when they ask, people know, like, they know, oh, this is the thing that we need to do. They just, needed the impetus to do it, or the permission to do it. So I have a great question here about, how does DevOps affect company culture? How do you think that these changes that we're seeing, in engineering and in development, security, operations, how do they flow throughout the rest of the organization? What's your experience been?
So how does it change? I will answer, it will depend, which is the eternal consultancy answer. But what I mean with that is that DevOps will your CEO, and it sounds really weird, but your CEO will actually allow certain DevOps change to happen, yes or no. And by that I mean, he probably sets the tone of your culture. And then when you move something in DevOps, whatever it is, like your collaboration or not, or your automation, yes or not, whatever the culture of the company already thinks is important, they will start doing practices on. If they believe that it's all about DevOps is all about automation, they will do everything about the automation. They think, if I just have an API, I don't have to talk to people. So that's that view. If you're measuring, we're going to measure, and ultimately the metrics are going to show we're going to have great success. Like, whatever we do, it's going to show we're having great success. if you look at the state of DevOps report, they have like the kind of the overachievers and the laggards, right? But if you look at them, they're all doing the technical things. They're all having a pipeline. They're all good. But it's only the people who have embraced that they're really serious about changing their culture, and that might be due to a new CEO coming in, or the person driving it having really the cultural change, that will make the difference of your DevOps transformation. So maybe DevOps again is the excuse to change, but if you're not using the opportunity of that, then it will be stuck and you'll be on to the next keyword again.
Yeah, that's great. We'll just take this this additional question, kind of flipping back over to DevSecOps. So are there industry-wide DevSecOps certifications for organizations like ISO?
To be honest, I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Of course, every term comes with its own consultants and comes with its own certification. I like certifications in a way that I use them myself for learning. But I wouldn't use them myself as a way that this is the absolute that I trust the person to do the right thing. But it is training. However we see it, certification is a training. But I'm not aware of a body that kind of specializes in that. I'm sorry about that.
No, I think if we find out, we'll put some comments in the link for you. So thanks for the question. So Patrick, we're interested to know, we're talking about DevSecOps and this pervasive idea that we should shift left. I think that's fairly well understood, but you also said you like to see organizations like consider shift right as well. Can you tell us more about is that something we should be thinking about, or that's just a reminder to it's not, it's not one or the other. It's about being thoughtful.
Yeah, it's just my DNA. When everybody says shift left, I say shift right, and whenever we say shift right, I should say shift left. But and the term shift right doesn't exist. You will not find it on the internet. But I just wanted to point out that much as Dev and Ops, we brought them together. It wasn't, you shouldn't see Dev and Ops as the two roles only. Like if there's production and development, the same person can work in both environments, and we kind of talked about that. The main point is that it is important to do the hygiene of the development and make sure that everything, as much as you can, you fix there. But it wouldn't be wise to say, then everything is fixed. So imagine you fix all your tickets from Jira and you're all good. It doesn't mean you're never going to get an outage. I'm sorry. I'm talking Atlassian here, but but that's the reality. And I think being prepared for both, work as much as you can to prevent, but be prepared when things happen. And even then, it's not always about production. Sometimes it's about is your business able to deal with an outage on a communication level? Does it have the right strategy in place to deal with that? So it's not only technical. And that's why I think both are important. And that's why I'm advocating this, not that I'm trying to launch a new label here.
Okay, you didn't hear it here first, folks. There's nothing new here. Thinking back to some of the things you're talking about, if the CEO wants to make that change, if they are, they want to make these cultural changes, they will look for ways to do that. I'm thinking about the people on the teams, the developers, people in security, when they think about their role changing, and the team structures are changing, right? We're seeing all these different type of team topologies and which ones are the best for an organization. How do you think that an individual, let's say a developer who is now is responsible potentially for, building it and running it, how do you think they should think about security and their role in that process of quality?
Sure. So I know a lot of people, when they kind of start working on DevSecOps transformations, within quotes, they're talking about we need to level up the developers on their security competence, like technical skills. And it's kind of important for people to understand, obviously, the domain they're working on, and what you don't know, it's kind of right. You have to learn, and security has a big role to play there in leveling up some of the competence. What the development can bring is knowledge of the terrain and knowledge of the code. So they're like helping the security folks to understand what's out there, whether they're running, and that so on. So that zoning on competence is only one aspect, and it's an important one, because we're all technicians in this, and we kind of judge people by how competent they are and how good they're doing their job. But there's, when you look at, there's a book called the Tin Book of Trust, and they kind of split it up, trust, in 4 things, and one of them is competence, but the other one is how sincere people are. So how is your culture that you're, whatever you say, that you actually mean what you say. So that is another thing to talk about. Like when I say security is important and I don't really mean it, then you're having another problem, even though I might be competent there. So, and that goes both ways. Both the developers and the security people and the ops kind of have that aspect. The third thing they mentioned is to be reliable. So imagine there's an issue, developers have to fix it. Is the security person there to help them? Or in the other way, if there's an audit, will they get the help from the developers to complete the audit? So this is kind of reliability when it's needed. Are they there? And then ultimately, and I know somebody asked the question, what's the biggest blocker? And sometimes I would say, there's a blocker in absorbing all this information. So there's a cognitive overload for the developer doing the technical things. Yeah. Being sincere, well, yeah, it's sometimes hard if you have conflicting priorities in the company, but okay. Reliable, be there on time. Well, you can get better at this. But then there's the fourth thing is do you even care? Like, I can be sincere, I can be reliable, I can kind of be competent, but if I don't care about it, then you're having a different problem. And that's one of the things where I think a lot of people say, well, let's start with security champions. Let's get all those people on board and so on. But some people did not sign up to be like security experts. They did not kind of want to do all this work. And so there's a large spectrum of motivation. Some will get motivated by, we need to do better quality. You're a champion. You're a professional. Go now do secure coding. But for others, it doesn't work. And that kind of alignment brings me to the fact that at some point, we can't do everything by everybody. We're not asking everybody to be the UX expert. We're not asking everybody to be the database expert. We need to know just enough in case we hit something, we can't do it, we don't know it, we're aware enough, and then we can seek help. And that's kind of my biggest advice, is that people start getting demotivated because the whole burden is put on them, where it should be more about like, okay, what is the best workable situation? Like, you do this, we do that, we trust each other, you're good at this, you're good at that. And that's how the team works. And it's not by everybody doing everything at the same time. Obviously, understanding the other roles and understanding what the others need to do puts you a long way of kind of understanding, when you do a code, what the impact is on security, or vice versa. If you not approve a fix, what the impact is on the features not going live. But that is kind of the advice that I give, is don't get focused on the whole team needs to do everything, or is the DevOps team somewhere in the middle? Is it the whole team that runs it? I started like looking at it like whatever distribution works best within your situation. And sometimes that is a separate team, but
yes,
if you're collaborating, there's no issue in there that they are just under another umbrella. And that's the same thing, like I mentioned, a term is to put like different stress points or different IDs, which is very similar to groups. They all have their kind of role to play to say, hey, did you think about security? Hey, did you think about the features? Hey, did you think about the cost? And everybody's kind of like putting that pressure, and you should not blame anybody for the pressure, and you should not block anybody with your own pressure. But it's kind of finding like, okay, why are we doing this? And I always jokingly say, well, we're not going to motivate developers by saying, well, it's good for the business. It's just not going to happen. So there needs to be a little bit alignment with their personal goals on making sure they have an interest or not, or they have somebody to rely on in case they're not really interested in there. So that's the biggest blocker.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I think it's really, I think part of what you were saying there is like, there's no one ideal way that this looks in an organization. I heard you say like, it might be a separate team, you might be together, like it's about playing off everybody's strengths. I'm curious how you think about, you mentioned feedback earlier, and this idea that, you need to be thoughtful and have continuous learning. Do you think that there is a way to, let's say you start off with a culture that people don't trust each other, like in general, people are not reliable because they're in their silo and they only do, what somebody up here says rather than somebody over here. Are there ways to change culture and create trust within like maybe smaller teams?
Yeah, so I've seen a couple of different approaches. Is you give people a common goal, and they start aligning around that goal. But obviously, if you give another team another goal and they're conflicting, you're back at square zero.
Right.
But it's definitely helping in the bonding, right? And that's why if you only give your team a bonus for delivering features on time, but you don't take into account that the production is running correctly, and then it's kind of those incentives are not aligned in that way. Some people do this by rotating people in certain teams, and they kind of bring knowledge back from one team to kind of the other. So that's another approach. Or you kind of give people a choice. Do you want to go somewhere else? Do you want to learn? Do you want to have this aspect? So a lot of it is about giving space to people to make sure that they have this opportunity to deviate from their existing patterns. And the more they do together, whether that's pair programming, whether that's threat modeling, whether that's dojos, whether that's mob programming, like everything that you do together just creates a bond. And that's usually a good way of doing this.
That's great. So I want to like think a little bit more about the future now. So we talked about, going back to 2009 and some of the things we're seeing now with security. Like, what do you think the next set of challenges will be for businesses, and what will be the impact on like what I call modern software development? Where do you see like the next quote unquote ops? What's coming for us?
Well, it's like a crystal ball, right? So
please predict the future.
I do think, particularly in DevSecOps, there's an area that I think is under highlighted, which is the prioritization. And I mentioned this before. The prioritization is not like, is the one vulnerability a 7 on a CVE scale or a 3 or something like that. It's the mixture of, are we going to work on the feature? Are going to work on a security fix? Are we going to do some stability? So where all the threads in the backlog kind of come together, like who gets the consensus about what we do next? And security is a little bit weird because it doesn't really immediately add value.
Yes.
And so how do you balance this prioritization? So that's an area that I think there's some discussion. There's also some part of the SAFE framework which tries to address this with some kind of areas of research. So that's kind of how I think DevSecOps is different from DevOps. It's the risk kind of prioritization, which is a little bit weird. It's like insurance. We don't really know that.
That's right.
In general, there's going to be hopefully a broader thinking that we're getting past DevOps thinking. Let's think how this impacts hiring, impacts the silo, finance impacts the silo, kind of different areas. But then we can start calling it agile again because we're back reunited with the business. Ultimately, I hope we're kind of getting there. But we'll always put our own challenges up that you need a new word. So.
Yes, I'm sure we'll find a new word. And I'm very curious about the prioritization. Obviously, being on the product side, I think there's a tendency to kind of say like, oh, go prioritize this. And I think you're right. It's a very different kind of skill set to understand and see the impacts of those. So I think maybe an acknowledgement that there are multiple viewpoints there is really important. So before we wrap up, are the things that, you know, our audience should be thinking about? Maybe they're starting a DevSecOps, or maybe they're new to DevOps, like any final words of wisdom or trends that you think we should all be kind of paying attention to?
So if you are passionate about DevOps or DevSecOps and you want to drive the change in your company and your company is new to this, I get a lot of questions from people. Well, they're not seeing the value. They're not hearing me when I bring up these ideas, and they get into this kind of frustration pattern where they're not getting, you know, success with their story, even though it's happening in other companies. They're not getting the success. And my advice is always, but have you tried listening to what their problem is? You came up ready to say, this is the solution, but you're not listening to what the other thinks is the problem. You might, you know, have a different opinion on it, but you kind of need to phrase the value you're bringing for the pain somebody else is feeling. And that's kind of where I see a lot of the frustration of the early adoption, is that we're not getting it across that it's valuable.
Yes.
Well, guess what? If you can't like touch on what value we are bringing to that person, you can't articulate that. Stop doing and naming it DevOps. Is just look at what you're facing and try to help that in little steps. So that's some useful advice for people starting there.
Yeah, I think it's really great advice. It's been delightful to have you. And I think ending on that note of like, listen, be thoughtful, be mindful. It's not just about, you know, the term we started off with or any of the others. I think that's really the most important thing. And hopefully everybody has had a great time listening to you, and they can connect with us in the comments. So thank you so much, Patrick. And hopefully we can have you back another time.
Well, it was my pleasure. So feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, Patrick Debois. That's where I blurt most out of my ID. So
great. You heard it here, everyone. Thank you so much.